It was my 62nd birthday, and my son, my only child, walked in 20 minutes late, handed me a crumpled grocery bag, and said, "Here, I didn't have time to wrap it." Inside was a plastic bouquet from the dollar store, still tagged 149 no card. No hug. Just a quick, "You're always saying you don't need anything," before he plopped on the couch and started scrolling through his phone. But what he didn't know was this. Earlier that morning, I opened 3 credit cards, all in his name. A mother never forgets how you make her feel. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. My name is Grace Whitmore, and for most of my life I wore the word mother like a badge of honor. I wasn't born into luxury. My parents worked hard. Mama was a cleaner, and Daddy drove long-haul freight trucks. They taught me that love doesn't always come with ribbons, but with sacrifice. I carried that lesson with me into adulthood, especially when Harold and I were told we might never have children. We prayed, we cried, we hoped, and then one day, after nearly 10 years of disappointment and fertility treatments, we got our miracle. Brian. Oh, how we doted on him. Harold was a stern man, but gentle with his boy. I still remember the way he'd cradle Brian's head in one hand and feed him with the other, whispering, "You're the best thing I ever made." We had no fancy cars, no vacations abroad. But Brian never went without. He had new shoes for school, warm meals, and 2 parents who loved him more than life itself. When he was little, Brian was affectionate and bright, always clinging to my apron, always asking questions. He had Harold's jawline and my eyes, and a sweetness that made teachers stop me in the hallway just to say, "You're raising a good one, Grace." We kept him safe. Too safe, maybe. Harold worried sometimes. "We need to let him fall a little," he'd say. "Learn to earn his way." But I always stepped in, tied his shoes, fixed his homework, called the school when he forgot assignments. Told myself I was just helping. That's what mothers do. When Harold died, just like that, one morning in the garden, with pruning shears still in his hand, it was like the air had left the house. My world blurred. And Brian, he just went quiet. He was 19, a college freshman. He came home to support me, he said. I needed that. I didn't notice at first how long he stayed. I told myself he was grieving, that he needed space, that he'd bounce back. But the months turned to years, and Brian never went back to school. He'd sleep until noon, skip job, interviews, and assure me he had something in the works. I started paying his phone bill, then his insurance, then the little loan he took out to launch a podcast. He moved into Harold's old workshop behind the house, turned it into his man cave. And though I told people he was between things, the truth was he'd stopped trying, and I'd kept on giving. I gave him my time, my car, my money, and maybe worst of all, my silence. Because I was scared. Scared that if I pushed too hard, he'd drift away completely. Scared that I'd lose him too. There were warnings, subtle ones. My sister Diane saw them before I did. You're not helping him grow, Grace. You're helping him rot. Even Pastor Rick took me aside after church. One Sunday. Love doesn't mean always saying yes, he said gently. Boundaries are holy too. But I wasn't ready to hear it. I was holding on to the little boy I used to rock to sleep, not the grown man sleeping in till 2 p.m. and ordering takeout, on my dime. And still, every birthday, every holiday, I waited for signs that he saw me, that he appreciated the years I poured into keeping him afloat. But each time, the gifts grew smaller, the attention shorter, the gratitude non-existent. The year before, he gave me a leftover candle from a clearance bin. He didn't even bother to take the 1.0 sticker off the bottom. And yet, this year, I held out hope. I even made a roast, my favorite lemon bundt cake. I set the table with the nice linens. I wore the dress Harold used to say made me look like sunshine on a cloudy day. I wanted to believe Brian would notice, that maybe this year he'd remember the woman who gave him everything. I told myself, this year will be different. But of course it wasn't. And when he tossed that plastic bouquet at me without even looking up from his phone, something inside me didn't just bend, it broke. Brian wasn't always like this, or maybe he was, and I just refused to see it. After Harold passed, I was the one who told Brian to come home. I didn't want him to be alone in that cramped dorm room, eating vending machine dinners. And truthfully, I couldn't bear the silence of the house. It felt too big, too hollow, without Harold's humming or the shuffle of his slippers across the floor. So Brian returned with one suitcase and the grief of a boy who'd lost his father. But grief doesn't always show up as tears. Sometimes it comes as arrogance, apathy, or a deep, cold entitlement. At first he helped with groceries, took out the trash, cooked us dinner once in a while. But slowly, the balance began to shift. First, he stopped doing laundry, leaving piles of clothes on the kitchen chairs. Then it was the dishes, stacked high in the sink for me to wash. He commandeered the living room TV, claiming he needed to unwind. He used my car like it was his birthright. Didn't ask, just took the keys. And one day, when I mentioned the electricity bill had spiked, he rolled his eyes and said, "Well, maybe your old appliances are the problem." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't, because I'd started walking on eggshells. Anytime I brought up work, rent, or even basic chores, he'd get defensive. "You think I'm lazy? You don't get how hard it is out there for people my age." He was 26. At some point, he began borrowing money. 100 here, 200 there. "I'll pay you back Friday." But Friday never came. He tried a handful of things. A landscaping gig he quit after 3 weeks, a food delivery app he never opened, a tech startup idea that involved reselling custom keyboards that never shipped. Each time he failed, I told myself, he's still grieving. But how long does grief excuse disrespect? Diane kept warning me. "You're letting him become your third mortgage." She wasn't wrong. I started dipping into my savings. First for little things, takeout, phone bills, gas money. Then bigger ones, late car payments, overdraft fees, impulsive purchases he made under my name. I even canceled a women's retreat I had planned for over a year just to cover his emergency credit card debt. The emergency? A last-minute weekend trip to Miami with his buddies. He said it was networking. I said nothing, but it wasn't just the money. It was the attitude. Brian had started treating the house like a hotel with maid service. He'd leave dishes crusted with food, trash overflowed, towels molded on the floor, and when I'd politely ask for help, he'd grunt or pretend not to hear. One morning, I caught him in the backyard yelling into his phone, "Man, I don't even pay rent. My mom's got me set. She's retired. What else has she got to spend it on?" He laughed after that. I didn't. I stood behind the curtain, heart pounding, face hot with shame. That day, I stopped cooking dinner for 2. I made enough for myself and let him figure out the rest. He didn't notice, just ordered takeout on my card again. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table late into the night and ask myself, where did I go wrong? The answer always felt like a fog, somewhere between protecting him too much and punishing myself too little. Even Pastor Rick noticed something. He pulled me aside after service one Sunday. "You look tired, Grace, not just in your eyes, but in your spirit." I wanted to cry. Instead, I smiled. Just getting older. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that I was slowly disappearing in my own home, and the person erasing me was the one I'd once rocked to sleep in my arms. I remembered how Harold used to talk about dignity, how it was the one thing you should never give away, not even for love. And here I was, trading mine for the chance that maybe, my son would one day look at me and say, "Thanks, Mom." But he never did. He just took. And when my birthday rolled around, and he handed me that plastic bouquet like it was a joke, I finally understood. He didn't think of me as a person anymore. He saw me as a resource. A credit line, a doormat with a smile. And that's when I knew if I didn't change something soon, there'd be nothing left of me to save. It got worse. After my birthday, it was like a dam inside me cracked. But not all the way. I didn't scream or slam doors. I just watched. And once I started really watching, I couldn't unsee the truth. Brian had become a stranger. He came and went at odd hours, stumbling through the door smelling of whiskey and cheap cologne. His eyes were dull, sunken. I began finding empty bottles hidden behind the couch, vape cartridges tucked in coat pockets, and receipts for bars I'd never heard of, all paid for on my debit card. When I confronted him, his face twisted into something I barely recognized. "What's the big deal, Mom? You've got money. What else are you going to spend it on? Knitting?" Knitting. He didn't know I had sold the last of Harold's antique tools just 2 months earlier to pay off the electric bill he ran up blasting music all night. He didn't notice I'd stopped buying fresh fruit, stopped seeing the podiatrist, skipped my annual mammogram, because I was always covering for him. And now, he was bringing friends over, loud, slouching boys with greasy hair and girls who called me ma'am like it was a curse. They played drinking games in the backyard where Harold once grew tomatoes. I found a cigarette burn on my sofa. Someone left the freezer open one night, ruining all the food. Another time, I found a used glass pipe in the bathroom drawer. I flushed it without a word. The final straw? One Sunday morning, I went to put on my pearl earrings, my wedding. Pearls. Gone. Brian swore he hadn't seen them. Swore up and down that I must have misplaced them. "You're getting older, Mom. Maybe your memory's slipping." My knees gave out right there on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I just sat, staring at the imprint his boots had left in the carpet. That night, I opened my jewelry box and wrote down every item still inside. Then I took photographs, time-stamped and cataloged. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was preparing for war. Diane came over one evening with chicken soup and a stack of printouts. "You need to read these," she said. "This is financial abuse, Grace. What he's doing, it's not just selfish, it's wrong." I skimmed articles with titles like, "When Adult Children Exploit Their Parents, Recognizing Financial Manipulation in Families, the High Cost of Enabling." Every paragraph stung like vinegar in a wound. I was living the textbook case. But knowing the truth and acting on it, that's a chasm most mothers can't cross. He was still my son, my baby, my miracle. How do you punish someone you once sang lullabies to? But then came the bank letter. Brian had taken out a personal loan online, $5,000. He used my address and phone number, defaulted on it within weeks. Collectors started calling. One even showed up at the door, asking for him by full name. I told Brian he needed to handle it. He laughed. "Just block the number, they'll stop eventually." My hands trembled as I set the phone down. "Do you even care what you're doing to me?" He smirked. "You're retired. What stress do you have?" Stress? Didn't know about the night terrors, the way I startled awake every time a car door slammed outside. The way I clutched my purse even inside the house, because I didn't feel safe anymore, not in my own home, and not because of burglars, because of my own child. The guilt was unbearable. I remembered Harold once telling me, years ago after Brian had gotten suspended for stealing a classmate's wallet, "Grace, if we don't make him face consequences now, he'll grow up thinking he can do whatever he wants to people who love him." I had defended Brian then, said he was just curious, that he was acting out, that boys made mistakes. Now I wondered, had Harold seen this coming all along? The night after I found the pawn shop slip for my pearls, I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the cold tile. My whole body ached. I whispered, "Harold, I'm so sorry." Because deep down, I knew I hadn't just lost my husband. I had given away the rest of myself in tiny pieces, and now all that was left was rage. And in that moment, I stopped being afraid of losing Brian and started being afraid of losing myself. The night I sat on the kitchen floor, knees drawn to my chest, I drifted into memories without meaning to, like they were leaking through a crack in my soul. I saw Brian at 5 years old, standing on a plastic stool in our old kitchen, mixing cookie dough with both hands, flour on his cheeks. "We're making these for Daddy," he said, serious as a judge. I saw the way Harold looked at him, like he was both the beginning and the end of every good thing in our lives. I remembered the sound of Brian's little feet running down the hallway on Christmas morning, how he used to tug at my robe and whisper, "Did Santa come?" even when he was too old to believe. I remembered rocking him through a fever, his body burning against mine like a coal. I hadn't slept that night. I just held him and prayed to God to let me keep him, and I remembered most painfully the day we dropped him off at college. Harold had shaken his hand like a man. I hugged him like a mother does, tight, desperate, 1 second too long. He smiled and said, "Don't cry, Mom. I'll make you proud." I had believed him. I wanted so badly to believe him still, but that version of Brian was gone, replaced by a man who could look me in the eye and lie without blinking, who could steal from me and still ask what was for dinner. And yet, there was still a part of me that grieved for him, for the boy I raised, not the man he'd become. The memories made it worse, because they reminded me of everything we'd lost. Don't know how long I sat there in the dark. At some point, the refrigerator motor kicked on and startled me. I stood slowly, knees aching, back stiff. I walked to the table and picked up the plastic flowers Brian had given me just 2 days earlier, cheap, hollow, covered in dust and poorly glued glitter. They were the perfect symbol for what we'd become. Carried them to the trash, but something stopped me. I stared at them instead, gaudy, fake, lifeless. I whispered, "This is how he sees me." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened Harold's old filing cabinet, the one he used to call his safety net. Tucked inside were years of tax returns, photocopies of IDs, old checkbooks, and Brian's birth certificate. I took it out with shaking hands. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for at first, but I knew what I wanted: leverage, consequences, something real in a relationship that had become entirely one-sided. An hour later, I was filling out online applications for 3 different credit cards, all in Brian's name. I used the information he had left scattered around the house, his driver's license copy from when he applied for a passport that he never followed through on, his social security number from an old job application. Paused before submitting, not because I doubted he deserved it, but because I knew, once I clicked that button, I was no longer just the heartbroken mother. I was something sharper, more dangerous. I was a woman reclaiming her power. I hit submit, approved, twice. The third one said pending, but I knew it would go through. Brian had no debt history, no bills in his name, no credit at all really, just a blank canvas, perfect for what I had in mind. I began to plan, not to ruin him, but to wake him up, to give him a crash course in adult accountability that I should have given him years ago. I didn't buy frivolously. I was strategic. I signed him up for 3 online coaching programs, each costing over $300 a month. I enrolled him in a luxury men's grooming kit subscription, a career coaching app, a language learning service. I even donated to a few charities under his name, ones he'd mocked in the past, and for each charge, I saved the receipt. I kept a spreadsheet, labeled and dated. I wasn't sabotaging him. I was leaving a trail, a lesson, a mirror. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not guilt, not anger, control. Later that morning, Brian came stumbling in around 11, shirt wrinkled, hair wild. "Got any food?" He grunted, already rummaging through the fridge. I didn't answer. He didn't notice. I watched him through lowered lashes, the same way you watch an avalanche from far off, helpless to stop it, but finally aware that it's coming straight. For the person who started it. Be honest. Have you ever done everything for someone only to feel invisible to them? Tell me in the comments. That morning, while he chewed the last of my groceries and scrolled through his phone, I sat across the table knowing something he didn't. His wake-up call had already been mailed, charged, and approved. For the first time in years, I had a secret, and not the kind that weighed on you. It lifted me. There was a strange lightness in knowing I had finally stopped waiting for Brian to change and had started changing myself. That week, I moved differently. I started by locking my bedroom door at night. I told him I was having trouble sleeping and needed quiet. He grunted and went back to his room. He didn't question it. He never did. Not as long as I made it easy for him. Next, I visited my bank and quietly opened a separate checking account. I moved just enough into it to cover my monthly expenses, utilities, groceries, church offerings. The rest I left where it was. Brian didn't have access, but I still felt safer splitting the funds. Then I called my phone provider and took his line off my family plan. He only found out when his service cut out mid-call. He came storming into the kitchen like a child, waving his dead phone in the air. What happened to my service? I looked up from my crossword puzzle. You'll need to get your own plan. Mine was too expensive. He stared at me, waiting for the punchline. Seriously? He scoffed. I nodded once. Seriously. He cursed under his breath and stomped back to his room. I didn't flinch, because something in me had hardened, or maybe grown. For once, I didn't feel like a victim in my own home. I started going for morning walks again, just around the block. I wore Harold's old baseball cap and let the wind tangle my hair. I rejoined the church book club, even led a discussion on forgiveness. I didn't mention Brian, but when we talked about boundaries, I found myself nodding along harder than anyone. I even said aloud, sometimes love means letting someone feel the consequences of their own choices. Pastor Rick gave me a slow, knowing look. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, the credit cards I opened in Brian's name had begun to bloom. The self-improvement charges kept rolling in. Podcasts, motivational courses, a $70 monthly subscription to a masculine mentorship collective I found online. Each charge was deliberate. Each one a reminder. If you won't invest in yourself, I'll show you how ridiculous it looks when someone else does it for you. I started getting email notifications, statements, payment reminders. I paid the minimums, on time, every time. So, nothing defaulted too early. I wanted this to build slowly, a crescendo. Brian remained blissfully unaware until the first envelope arrived. He opened it at the kitchen table, frowning at the bold type. Your statement is ready. What's this? He muttered, flipping the page. $400 for Success Path Monthly Mastery? He looked up at me, confused. Did you sign me up for this? I sipped my tea. I thought you were always saying you needed motivation. He squinted. And what's Power Mindset Warrior Journal? I raised my eyebrow. You tell me. It's your card. He blinked. My what? I stood and walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of every transaction, color-coded by date. I laid them gently in front of him like evidence in a trial. I've been managing your finances for a while. Now, I said calmly. You didn't want responsibility, so I gave you some. His face drained of color. This is fraud. You can't open cards in my name. Oh, but you've used my name for years. My credit, my money, my kindness, my house. I leaned in. I figured it was time to return the favor. He stood up, chair screeching against the tile. You're insane, I shrugged. Maybe. But insane mothers don't pay for Miami weekends or pod systems or disappearances of wedding jewelry. They also don't keep bailing out grown men who treat them like walking ATMs. He stormed out, slammed the door so hard a photo of Harold tipped over. I didn't chase him. Instead, I picked up the frame, straightened it, and whispered, "I think you'd be proud." The days that followed were quiet. Brian sulked in his room, speaking little, eating less. He called a few friends, asked about crashing on their couches. I overheard one say, "Man, you better fix things with your mom. Nobody else gonna put up with that." I almost laughed. Almost. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't putting up with anything. I was reclaiming space, reclaiming sanity, reclaiming me. He gave me plastic flowers. I gave him plastic credit cards and a life lesson wrapped in a bow of interest and fees. It didn't take long for the unraveling to begin. The first real crack in Brian's bravado came one Friday morning when I walked into the kitchen and found him sitting at the table, unshaven, shirt inside out, holding a stack of papers with trembling hands. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice low but charged. He shoved the envelope across the table. I glanced down. It was a credit alert. His score had dropped by nearly 80 points. "I guess those mindset subscriptions are finally showing up," I said, reaching for my tea. He stood. "You're ruining my credit." "No, Brian," I replied, cool and measured. "You're just finally building one." That was the moment he realized it wasn't a one-off joke, that I hadn't just signed him up for one goofy service and walked away. I had been orchestrating something bigger, something calculated. He paced like a caged animal. "This is illegal. You could go to jail for this." I took a slow sip of tea. So could people who commit financial fraud, who open loans using someone else's identity, or steal jewelry. His face went pale. "You pawned my wedding pearls, Brian," I said, my voice still soft but now lined with steel. "You stood there and lied to me, and then you kept eating. My food, living under my roof, using my name like it was your own." He tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "You may not like what I've done, but let's be clear. I learned it from you." He stormed out of the kitchen, slammed his door. By Monday, the phone calls started. First, it was a soft-voiced customer service rep. "We're calling to verify unusual activity on your account." Brian called me at work, something he never did. "They're saying I owe $600. I didn't authorize any of this." "Welcome to adulthood," I said. "It's full of surprises." His voice broke. "You've ruined me." I wanted to tell him that he was never ruined, just revealed. Then came the car. I had added him as a driver on my insurance policy when Harold died, just to help him get around. I never took him off. So I did. One phone call, and Brian could no longer legally drive the car he used every day. The next morning, I handed him the bus schedule and said, "You'll need this." He laughed, then realized I wasn't joking. The unraveling sped up. He started losing things. Friends stopped answering his texts. One of them, Derek, a fast-talking boy who always left beer bottles on my lawn, told him flat out, "Nobody's gonna let you crash forever, man. Grow up." He started leaving the house for hours at a time, only to come back looking worn and angrier than before. One night, I woke to the sound of shouting. He was in the driveway, yelling into his phone, "It's not my fault. She set me up. My own mom." Then came the breaking point. I was in the kitchen washing a mug when I heard glass shatter. Brian had thrown a plate, my mother's antique china, against the wall. I turned slowly. He stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched. "I have nothing," he yelled. "You've taken everything from me." I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "No, Brian, you had everything, and you threw it away." He lunged forward, not to hit me, but to grab the phone off the wall. "I'm calling the bank. I'm fixing this." I walked to the front door, opened it. "Get out," I said. He froze. "What?" "You heard me? Get out of my house." He laughed, confused. "You're not serious." "I am." He looked around like someone waking from a dream. Where am I supposed to go? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. And for once, that wasn't my responsibility. He stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. I locked the door behind him. For the first time in 26 years, I locked the door on my own son. Then I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I exhaled and slept. A deep, uninterrupted sleep. The next morning, I changed the locks. When Brian returned that afternoon, banging on the door, I met him through the window. You need help, I told him, and I need peace. Until you can respect both, you're not welcome here. He looked stunned. Then came the anger, then silence. He turned and walked away. I watched him go. I don't know where he went. I don't know who he called. But that night, the house was quiet, and I sat in the living room, listening to the silence, feeling its strange comfort. He thought he could smash a plate and scare me back into submission, but all he did was shatter the last piece of control he ever had. The first few days after Brian left felt like a strange kind of mourning. I kept expecting the back door to creak open, for his voice to echo down the hallway, for a new problem to land in my lap like a stray bird with broken wings. But the silence held, and in that silence, I began to hear something I hadn't in years, myself. I spent the next week reclaiming my house. I donated 2 trash bags full of his old clothes, cleaned out the workshop he had turned into a gaming cave, took down the blackout curtains, opened the windows, and let the light back in. I boxed up Harold's old gardening tools again, not to sell this time, but to keep. Then, one morning an envelope arrived. It wasn't handwritten. It came from a county office. Inside, a court summons. Brian had been caught shoplifting at a convenience store. He tried to walk out with headphones and 2 packs of cigarettes. When the clerk stopped him, he panicked and ran. He was caught 6 blocks away, sitting on a park bench, crying. The court-mandated letter said he'd been referred to a recovery program in lieu of jail, if he followed through with every step. At the bottom was a hand-scrawled note from Brian. I know I messed up. I just didn't know what else to do. You were my safety net. I thought you'd always be there. I don't blame you for locking me out. I probably would have done worse. If they let me talk to you, I will. I stared at the words until they blurred, not because I forgave him, but because, for the first time, it sounded like they were written by the boy I remembered. Still, I didn't respond, not right away, because I needed to know if he meant it. Days turned into weeks. I went back to morning walks, started volunteering at the food pantry, relearned how to cook for one. People noticed a change. Diane hugged me tighter. Pastor Rick asked me to lead a church seminar on boundaries that heal. At first, I declined. But then I thought, maybe that's exactly what I've learned how to do. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Mom? It was Brian. His voice was hoarse, quieter than I'd ever heard it. I'm in the program. They're teaching us to make amends. This is part of it. I didn't expect you to answer. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I waited, not because I was angry, but because I needed to hear if it was real. I wasn't just selfish, he continued. I was cruel. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't know why you didn't. Kick me out sooner. I closed my eyes. Because I loved you too much, I said. And I didn't love myself enough. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, I don't expect you to trust me. I just hope you're okay. I am, I said, and I meant it. He asked if we could meet sometime. Not at the house, just somewhere neutral. I said yes. We met at a small diner 2 towns over. Neutral ground, no memories tied to it. He looked thinner, paler, but clearer too. His eyes didn't dart around like they used to. He didn't fidget with his phone. He didn't make excuses. He told me he'd started working at the recovery center. Just janitorial tasks, but steady. He was taking classes on budgeting, communication, accountability. Said he was even helping lead a support group for young men with fractured family ties. Turns out, he said, a lot of us were raised by moms who gave us everything, and we never learned what enough meant. I nodded. Love without limits isn't love. It's martyrdom. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were my wedding pearls. I tracked them down, he said. The pawn shop still had them. I used my first 2 paychecks. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Thank you, I said softly. We didn't hug. Not then. It wasn't time yet. But we did sit for an hour, drinking coffee, talking like 2 people who'd both survived a fire. And somehow, the smoke was clearing. He gave me back my pearls, but more importantly, he gave me something I never thought I'd see again. A glimpse of the man I once hoped he'd become. The months that followed, the house stayed quiet. No shouting. No heavy footsteps slamming doors. No panicked calls about overdraft fees or broken phones. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of wind slipping through the cracks of the old kitchen window. I learned how to live in that silence and, eventually, how to enjoy it. I started gardening again, bought new gloves, fresh soil, and real flowers, petunias, marigolds, lavender. I made space for life to return, and slowly it did. Every Sunday, I saw Diane at church. We'd sit together like we used to before everything got heavy. One morning, she leaned over and whispered, "You're glowing again, Grace. I almost forgot what you looked like when you weren't exhausted." I laughed, a real one. It felt good, not to be waiting on the next disaster. Brian didn't come back, not to the house, not uninvited. But he did check in. Once a week, like clockwork, a phone call, a short text, a photo of his work badge from the recovery center. One day he sent me a picture of a receipt, his first official rent payment. "Tiny room," he wrote. "But it's mine." He was starting over. This time, without taking pieces of me to build his foundation. And I was rebuilding too. Only this time, I wasn't pouring everything I had into someone else's cup. I joined a walking group with women from church. We met at 7 a.m. sharp and walked the outer loop of the park. We didn't talk much at first, but soon we were sharing everything. Recipes, back pain complaints, stories about our children. Turns out I wasn't the only one with a son who'd taken more than he gave. But unlike before, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt wise. One afternoon, I came across the plastic bouquet Brian had given me on my birthday, the one that started it all. It had been shoved to the back of the linen closet, tucked behind a pile of old towels. I held it for a moment, felt its cheapness, its lifelessness, its perfect metaphor. Then I opened the shadow box I'd bought the week before. I pressed the bouquet inside, sealed it shut, and wrote one word on the label: enough. It now hangs in my hallway, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of power. Then came the lunch. 3 months after our diner meeting, Brian asked if we could have a proper meal together. He said he wanted to show me something he'd been working on. We met at a cafe this time. He arrived early, hair trimmed, shirt tucked in. He looked older, not in a tired way, in a grown way. After we ordered, he pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were documents. Proof he'd finished the recovery program, a letter from his counselor, a budget spreadsheet, color-coded no less, and tucked at the back, a handwritten letter, addressed to me. I opened it. "Mom, I never saw what I was doing to you until you stopped letting me do it. You were my lifeline, and instead of honoring that, I drowned us both in my selfishness. I know I can't take back the things I stole from you, your peace, your savings, your faith in me, but I'm asking not for your forgiveness, but for the Chance to prove that I've changed. Slowly, day by day. Thank you for choosing yourself. You taught me how to do the same. Love, Brian, I didn't cry, not until later. At the table, I just reached across and touched his hand. Thank you, I said. That was all we needed for that day. If this were your child, would you let them back into your life? Or would you leave the door closed? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. As the months passed, our relationship didn't go back to what it was. It became something better, healthier, more honest. He never moved back in. He didn't ask to. He respected the distance. He began calling me on Sundays, not just to vent or ask for help, but to ask how I was doing. The first time he said, "How's the garden coming along?" I had to sit down, because he noticed he was seeing me again, and more importantly, I was seeing myself. In the end, he didn't just pay back a debt. He gave me something far more valuable, the proof that boundaries don't end love. They just teach it how to grow right. When I look back now, it's not the screaming or the stealing or even the silence that haunts me most. It's how long I allowed myself to disappear. You don't notice it all at once. The way your voice gets quieter, your shoulders start to hunch, your joy begins to shrink to fit inside someone else's chaos. You tell yourself, this is what mothers do. This is what love looks like. This is just a rough patch. But years pass, and the patch becomes the fabric of your life. I used to think sacrifice was the highest form of love. But now I know better. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure, and I erased myself for a long, long time. It took a plastic bouquet for me to finally wake up. $149, price tag still on. That cheap, hollow gesture turned out to be the mirror I didn't want, but needed, because when someone gives you a gift with no thought, no effort, no love, they're telling you how little they see you, and when you accept that gift without protest, you're telling them they're right. That morning, I realized I wasn't just disappointed. I was complicit, so I changed, quietly, deliberately, and the world didn't end. It began. I still keep the plastic flowers. They're framed in a shadow box in my hallway, right by the front door. Every time I walk past them, I remember the woman I used to be, and the woman I chose to become. They're not a symbol of what Brian did to me. They're a symbol of what I stopped allowing. Brian and I speak every week. We don't talk about the past much. Sometimes it comes up in small ways, a joke, a reference, a quiet apology tucked between stories. But mostly, we talk about the now. He tells me about his work at the recovery center, how he mentors younger men who are trying to undo the damage they learned at home. He recently told me he's taking a class in social work, wants to help people rebuild after hitting rock bottom. He said, "Turns out I had a front row seat to what enabling looks like and what healing looks like too." That made me smile, because that healing? It didn't start with therapy, or jail, or a program. It started with me, a tired, heartbroken mother who finally said the word, enough. Some nights I still miss the boy he used to be, but I don't grieve him anymore, because the man he's becoming, he's someone I never thought I'd meet, and I'm learning to know him now, day by day. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know this. I'm not afraid of it anymore, because I found something I never had before. Myself. So to anyone watching this, maybe with a child who's bleeding you dry, who doesn't say thank you, who only knocks when they need more, please hear this. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to love someone without letting them wreck you. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you've remembered that you matter too. I was 62 when I learned that lesson. It's never too late. He gave me something fake, so I gave him something real, a boundary. And from that boundary, we both started to bloom.